Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I will do some introductions first. I'm Beth Taylor. I'm staff on MarchonHarrisburg, which is one of the organizations on the statewide coordinating committee of the Poor People's Campaign, the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign. And I live in the Lehigh Valley, and I am also co-leader of the MarchonHarrisburg chapter in the Lehigh Valley.
My name is Reverend Beth Hoffman Reed. I'm an Episcopal priest in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I'm a faith leader with the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign and a member of MarchonHarrisburg in the Lehigh Valley chapter. So glad to be here today in this room.
All right, so I'd like to welcome everybody. I'm really happy to see everybody here. Thank you for joining us for this overview of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we're just going to jump right in. So the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is a national campaign, and there are state coordinating committees in almost all of the states, including Pennsylvania. So the campaign, we're committed to addressing 5 interlocking injustices, and those are systemic poverty, systemic racism, ecological devastation, militarism and a war economy, and the distorted moral narrative that helps keep all of those injustices in place. We say that we have to organize against all 5, that they're all related. And in the campaign, the people most affected by these injustices offer testimonies. It helps us put a face on what can sound abstract, and we call this sharing our plight, our fight, and our insight. So we're going to play a short video here that lets us hear many voices from the campaign. It starts with words from Reverend Dr. William Barber and Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, who are co-chairs of the Poor People's Campaign.
We must be honest about the foundations of the political and economic systems we call America. I love America because of her potential, but I know that America will never even get close to being a more perfect nation until we are honest about the politics of rejection.
I want to tell you about some of the leaders who are building the Poor People's Campaign. Callie Greer from Selma, Alabama, who had to bury her daughter, Venus, because she didn't have health care.
I'm here today to share my daughter Venus's story. Venus discovered a small lump in her breast and she wasn't insured. Venus had to be approved for every prescription and every piece of medical equipment that she needed. I'm standing here today in solidarity with the Poor People's Campaign because no one should have to bury their child in America because they don't have health care insurance.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am a working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
I'm a second-generation fast food worker, and I've experienced the cycle of poverty firsthand. Growing up, I watched my mother endure long hours of back-breaking labor, doing everything she could to feed me and my sisters. My employer barely pays me enough to pay rent and utilities, let alone with the medical expenses with my mother.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. My only chance of going to college was joining the Army.
It was one thing to know that you didn't have water and you couldn't afford your water. It's a whole nother to find out that they shut off your entire community and none of you matter.
But when I lost my housing, health care, and income all at the same time, I was terrified, panicked.
Hi, my name is Pamela Roach. I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama. And I live in a mobile home with my 2 kids. And I got raw sewage. I don't have no money on power. And I have to travel back and forth to Birmingham to take my daughter with the CPAP machine. Don't have a car and don't have no way to take her.
This is the largest encampment in Aberdeen. There's about 1,000 people in a town of 16,000 who are homeless.
In my community, we were all shut off for the day because none of us could afford our water bills. In the past, my family wasn't able to afford electricity in the winter. It was very hard on all of us.
This wall, this is sin of the highest order.
When there are 38 million poor children, when 60% of African Americans are poor, when 65% of Latinx are poor, when 40% of Asians are poor, when there are 67 million poor white people, we must say, this is not right.
So in the Poor People's Campaign, we speak of 5 interlocking injustices: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy and militarism, and a distorted moral narrative. I want to ask now the group, how did we see that? How did we see those injustices in the video we just watched? Did you see some people talk about more than one of these at the same time? We have a few minutes for this. You can take yourself off mute and share what you heard.
Hey, this is Randall in Harrisburg. You know, one thing I heard was one of the people speaking, how she's been poor her whole life. She's 42 years old. And I'm working. You know, she seemed like she really wanted to communicate that I'm trying my best. You know, I think the distorted moral narrative is that poor people are lazy, that they don't work, they don't want to put forth any effort. But the reality is that people are trying their hardest, and we're trying to live in a system that is designed. The deck is stacked against the common person in this country.
Yeah, thanks, Randall. Who else?
I think that the poverty and the systemic problems we have with all the rest of the 5 go back to poverty in a lot of ways and keep people down.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Who else?
The woman from DC, I think, who spoke about losing her health care, her job, and her housing all at once.
Yeah.
And also the woman who couldn't get her daughter to medical care, and and also in her backyard was raw sewage that nobody had addressed, which is part of the ecological devastation that's going on all over the country.
Yes, she's naming several there. Thanks, Nancy.
This seems generational. It's not something that's just now occurring. It seems to be situations where this has gone on from generation to generation.
Yep. Thank you.
They're all
Sue, I think you got muted.
I said they're all interconnected. It's hard to try to separate them. They're tightly woven together.
Yes. Yep.
There was the Vietnam vet who basically explained that his only option of going to college and bettering his life was joining the military. So that would be the war economy and militarization.
Yeah.
I'd like to add that it actually made me ill to listen to people talking like that.
You want to say a little bit more, Chris?
My stomach is just turning from listening to people suffering from such horrible places in their life that wouldn't have to be that way.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. Yep.
And even when you try to do things like better education, I heard a woman say she had a bachelor's degree and she was still struggling to try to make ends meet. There's something wrong with this system of things when you do everything in your ability to do the right thing and you still can't survive. It's something wrong with our government.
Yep. Yep, there's a lot of things wrong.
You know, when Reverend Barber and Liz Theoharis and a group of people who spoke on their own behalf addressed the budget committee in Washington, D.C. in 2019, they spoke very movingly of the intersection of all of these plights on their lives.
Yeah.
And the people, the majority of the people who responded to them, who didn't ask them questions about what they're experiencing, but went on a kind of like a moralistic rant about how they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and they were poor and food was provided for them by their neighbors and they prayed and they got housing and they prayed and this and that. And then really actually just, I mean, to me, that was one of the most egregious examples I've ever seen of a distorted moral narrative. Because they said basically they were representatives and had made it to the top of the political ladder, even though they'd been poor, but it's because they worked hard and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps.
Right. I'm going to say thank you, Nancy, for that transition into our next deeper dive into a distorted moral narrative. We've heard lots of people, we could see how these injustices interlock and are interwoven, they're generational. So let's go a little bit deeper into what we mean by a distorted moral narrative. Will someone read this slide, please? Just take yourself off mute.
The distorted moral narrative. What is moral in the U.S.? The distorted moral narrative of white supremacist Christian nationalism perverts and weaponizes morality against poor and marginalized people.
Thank you. The campaign calls people to a deeper and a wider view of morality, in which the needs of the poorest people receive priority, and not just in the form of charity, but in the form of changing structures that keep people poor. For example, Reverend Barber and Reverend Theoharis, with many other faith leaders, have repeatedly called out leaders of the so-called Christian right, saying that they misrepresent what the Hebrew prophets and Jesus stood for and taught. One fact they highlight is the more than 2,000 verses in the Bible that speak of poverty and justice and caring for the least of these. And as Reverend Barber puts it, too many preachers say so much about what the Bible says so little, and so little about what the Bible says so much. The distorted moral narrative we live with blames poor people for their poverty. But our campaign holds that the existence of poverty in the richest country in the world is the sin. The sin is in the structures that keep people poor and exploited and unable to meet our basic needs. It's the structures we need to address. Also, while plenty of people say there isn't enough money to care for everyone or to change the way we're used to doing business, we reject that. We call that a lie. That's a myth of scarcity. There is plenty of money and other resources to go around. The sin is that there is so much money and power held by a tiny few at the tippy top. So why a Poor People's Campaign? Well, the Poor People's Campaign, that name, recalls Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's initial Poor People's Campaign. King was working on this project when he was killed. He was convinced that it was organized poor people and people of moral conscience who could shift policies in this country. And we say a national call for moral revival because these are moral issues. These are matters of right and wrong. They're not matters of right and left. Our campaign knows that we have to revive a sense of genuine morality in our country to address the 5 interlocking injustices. These are moral issues. While some people want to restrict moral issues to who you sleep with or whether you can keep a gun or rules on abortion, we say these 5 major injustices are what we really need to care about and get busy about. So let's do a little history. Dr. King, late in his life, made 3 pivots. He turned from civil rights to human rights. He moved from calling out racism and working to end it to naming racism, poverty, and militarism as 3 things that needed to be addressed together. And he called these the evil triplets. Our campaign has taken his 3 evil triplets and added ecological devastation to that list, as well as the distorted moral narrative. And the 3rd thing King recognized that we needed to move from a period of reform to a period of revolution. This quote shows how King was moving people beyond civil rights to economic justice. Would someone be willing to read this aloud for us?
For we know now that it isn't enough to integrate lunch counters.
Hold on a second.
What does it profit a man?
No, now. Sorry.
Go ahead. For we know now that it isn't enough to integrate lunch counters. What does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't have enough money to buy a hamburger?
Thank you, Kitty. For the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, we see that a good 50 organizations joined forces to plan the Poor People's Campaign. These included welfare rights organizations and the participation of many women leaders. In early April, King is in Memphis in solidarity with the sanitation workers on strike, and he is assassinated. Leaders were devastated, of course, and they went ahead with the campaign. People traveled from several places in the country and converged in Washington, whole families. They built Resurrection City, tents on wooden platforms on the mall, and they lived there for around a month. They used local services and they demanded changes from legislators. The project ended in mid-June amid many challenges. And the vision of the organizations and King was for something much more sustained, and it did not happen. 50 years later, in 2018, these 2 organizations officially relaunched or officially launched what we now call the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. This followed 10 solid years of organizing and planning. The Kairos Center is in New York City, and it's led by the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, and Repairs of the Breach is in North Carolina, led by Reverend Dr. William Barber. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has drawn on scholarship regarding the 1968 campaign. And there are lessons to be learned. We've learned that we need many Martins, many leaders. King was a central figure, and after he was killed, it was hard for the movements to continue without such a figure. We also know that we need long-term, deep relationships between leaders and organizations if we're to overcome a divide and conquer strategy that's been used to keep us separate and divided.
So now we're going to take a deeper look at poverty, which is one of the key areas of our work. So there are more than 140 million poor and low wealth people in our country. That's more than about 43% of our whole population. It's huge. Those numbers, they may sound surprising because they're not the numbers that we're used to hearing. The way poverty is measured is very outdated, and it doesn't take into account what it actually costs to live decently in this country. The campaign has partnered with the Institute for Policy Studies to understand poverty and come up with better ways to measure it and understand what keeps it in place. So would anybody like to read this slide, the State of the Nation column, the statistics for the US?
Yeah, this is Randall in Harrisburg. 140 million people are poor or low income. 64.1% of Latinx people, or 38 million. 60.4% of Black people, or 26 million, 58.9% of Native or Indigenous people, 2.14 million people, 40.8% of Asian people, 8 million people, and 33.5% of white people, that's 66 million people throughout the nation. 13.8 million US households cannot afford water, and the poor are bearing the brunt of climate change effects.
Thanks, Randall. And would somebody like to read the Pennsylvania side?
4.7 million residents of Pennsylvania are poor or low income. 38% of residents, 73% of Latinx, 707,000 people. 63% of Black people, 842,000 people. 32% of white people, 3 million. 49% of our children, 1.3 million. And 41% of our women, 2.6 million. The minimum wage in Pennsylvania is $7.25 an hour in 2019. A living wage in the state in 2019 would be $24.24 an hour.
Thank you. So you can see in the chart that we cite different percentages of groups, and we do this regularly. We show that huge numbers of people are poor of many different groups, and that while people of color are disproportionately poor, in raw numbers, more white people are poor. We point this out to show that we have more in common with each other than popular media would portray. A chart like this shows us that our common interests, and that poverty is not just an issue for poor Black and brown people. I think Randall earlier named some of the things that we hear about poor people, which people are lazy or not motivated, that they've made bad choices, that it's their own fault. And we call that a lie. People are poor because of interlocking systems that keep us from having what we need. For example, labor is exploited, corporations don't pay their fair share of taxes, and we don't have equity in education or wages. So what's our response? We say, fight poverty, not the poor, and that everybody has a right to live. So these words from Dr. King inform our response. Who would be willing to read this slide?
I can read it.
Thank you.
The dispossessed of this nation, the poor, both white and Negro, live in a cruelly unjust society. They must organize a revolution against the injustice not against the lives of the persons who are their fellow citizens, but against the structures through which the society is refusing to take means which have been called for and which are at hand to lift the load of poverty. The only real revolutionary, people say, is a man who has nothing to lose. There are millions of poor people in this country who have very little or even nothing to lose. If they can be helped to take action together, they will do so with a freedom and a power that will be a new and unsettling force in our complacent national life.
Thanks, Larry. So the main way we respond to this is with fusion organizing. We're drawing together to understand our common needs and work for them together. Since the injustices of poverty, racism, environmental destruction, and militarism with a distorted moral narrative are all related, our response needs to be integrated as well. We're stronger when we draw together across many lines of differences. So fusion organizing, all of our issues and rights are interconnected, and we realize that we will not win alone. So that's why the movement is building at the state level, politically independent, nonpartisan, organizing on all four evils at once, and organizing across our differences. So in his book, The Third Reconstruction, How a Moral Movement is Overcoming the Politics of Division and Fear, Reverend Barber shares 14 principles critical to moral fusion organizing and mobilizing in the streets, at the polls, and in the courtroom. So we're going to take a little time to read through these. Beth, you want to take number one?
Yes. So the first thing is to engage in indigenously led grassroots organizing across the state. There is no end run around the relational work of building trust and empowering local people. Crises will bring out crowds and draw attention, but a sustained movement depends on local people who know one another and are committed to working together for the long haul. Helicopter leadership by national leaders will not sustain a moral movement. Equip and resource small groups of people who will meet regularly in their home communities to talk about the coalition's concerns.
Does somebody want to take step two?
Sure. Step two, use moral language to frame and critique public policy regardless of who is in power. A moral movement claims higher ground in partisan debate by returning public discourse to our deepest moral and constitutional values. Any moral movement must study scripture and sacred texts as well as state constitutions. We cannot allow so-called conservatives to hijack the powerful language of faith. Neither can we let so-called liberals pretend that moral convictions are not at play in public policy debates. Every budget is a moral document, or it is an immoral one. We must reclaim moral language in the public square.
Thank you. So step three is demonstrate a commitment to civil disobedience that follows the steps of nonviolent action and is designed to change the public conversation and consciousness. A moral movement draws power not from its ability to overwhelm opposition, but from its willingness to suffer. The Second Reconstruction brought large-scale nonviolent direct action to America through the Montgomery bus boycott. A third Reconstruction depends upon escalating non-cooperation in order to demonstrate our capacity to sacrifice for a better future. Somebody want to take step four?
Step 4, build a stage from which to lift the voices of everyday people impacted by immoral policies. A moral movement must put human faces on injustice and amplify the voice of the voiceless. We do not speak for those who can speak for themselves. We do not create a platform for politicians to speak for those who can speak for themselves. Directly affected people are the best moral witness. Our movement exists to let their voices be heard.
Thank you. Beth, you want to take step 5?
Yes. Recognize the centrality of race. America's first and second reconstructions sought to heal the wound of race-based slavery, America's original sin. Our third reconstruction must likewise be decidedly anti-racist. Some will ask, is the real issue today race or is it class? We answer, yes, it's race and class. Our class divisions cannot be understood apart from a society built on white supremacy. Our moral movement must be committed to the long-term work of racial equity.
Step 6, build a broad, diverse coalition, including moral religious leaders of all faiths. All faith traditions are not the same, but the common ground among faiths is a firm foundation upon which to stand against the divide and conquer strategies of extremists. We must be intentional about reaching out to marginalized groups in our states. Though they are a minority in this country, our Muslim sisters and brothers are essential to the third reconstruction. Somebody like to take step 7?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Step 7, intentionally diversify the movement with the goal of winning unlikely allies. Often, the groups most impacted by injustice have been convinced that they are enemies. Fusion politics is about helping those who have suffered injustice and have been divided by extremism to see what we have in common. We do this by bringing people together across dividing lines and helping them hear one another. We have no permanent enemies, only permanent issues, rooted in our deepest moral and constitutional values.
Thank you. Somebody like to take step 8?
I can do that. Step 8, build transformative long-term coalition relationships rooted in a clear agenda that doesn't measure success only by electoral outcomes. We must be clear, fusion coalitions are not about simple transactions where I support your issue if you support mine. We must learn how our issues intersect in a comprehensive moral agenda that demands transformation of everyone, not least of us.
Thank you. Step 9, make a serious commitment to academic and empirical analysis of policy. Nothing is worse than being loud and wrong. Our coalitions must include activist scholars, and we must commit ourselves to a serious consideration of data. Moral issues are not impractical. They can be translated into policy that is sustainable and that produces measurable positive outcomes. Somebody like to take step 10?
I will.
Oops.
Step 10, coordinate use of all forms of social media, video, text, Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. Mainstream media outlets are often unable to tell a story that doesn't fit within the established narrative. We must tell our own story. Social media afford us multiple outlets for the consciousness raising that movements have always depended upon. Use them all.
Beth, you want to take step 11?
Yep. 11, engage in voter registration and education. The political power of fusion coalitions is based upon a diversified electorate that recognizes common interests. Extremists understand this. They have invested heavily in restricting voting rights and dividing potential allies. We must engage voters in each election, educating them about how candidates have voted or committed to vote on issues that are part of our shared moral agenda.
All right, number 12. Somebody want to take number 12?
I will. Pursue a strong legal strategy. A moral movement rooted in constitutional values needs a strong legal team and a commitment to mobilizing in the courtroom. The future we imagine and embody in the streets must be established in our state houses and affirmed by our courts. We cannot neglect this key piece of our common life.
Thank you. And will somebody read step 13?
Step 13, engage the cultural arts. A moral movement is only as strong as the songs we sing together. Study the history of cultural arts in freedom movements and bring music, the spoken word, storytelling, and visual arts into your organizing. Make sure the images in your art and actions convey the same message you are proclaiming with words. Speak the truth, sing the truth, and use art to help people imagine the future they cannot yet see.
Thank you. And step 14, resist the one moment mentality. We are building a movement. No one victory will usher in beloved community. No single setback can stop us. We are building up a new world, moving forward together towards freedom and justice for all. So now I'm going to talk, thank you everybody who participated in reading, I appreciate that. And we're going to talk a little bit now about the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign. So in Pennsylvania, the campaign is led by a coordinating committee made up of organizations that are led by the poor and dispossessed. And these include ACT UP Philadelphia, Better Path Coalition, Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, or CADB, Global Women's Strike, Every Mother is a Working Mother, Marcellus Outreach Butler, March on Harrisburg, Movement of Immigrant Leaders in PA, MILPA, Pittsburghers for Public Transit, Put People First PA, the Thomas Merton Center, and Eric, I think I left off your organization. Would you like to name that for us?
Or Payday Men's Network. We work closely with Global Women's Strike. Thank you.
Thank you. So to paraphrase Reverend Barber, we're not an organization, we're an organism. And we have statewide working groups. We have a media and communications group, fundraising, outreach, a faith leaders group that meets monthly. The faith leaders group has 5 goals, and that's to study Poor People's Campaign materials and sacred texts that are meaningful and motivational to our members, support faith leaders in the justice work that we are doing, politicize charity work into justice projects of survival, organize and empower our congregations, create permanently organized communities, and learn about the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign member organizations and how to support their work, and attach ourselves to member organizations and organizational leaders, and sacrifice together, be in the public square and at our temples. And then there's also a working group called the Underground Railroad. And this group convenes as needed to support movement leaders' material, emotional, and spiritual needs as they struggle to make change in the face of unjust systems. So this is just a small list of some past actions and events and the ways we've engaged the community and each other. We've had 40 days of direct action back in 2018. That was 6 weeks every Monday of showing up in Harrisburg and doing nonviolent direct actions. The Poor People's Hearings, we had those at different locations in Pennsylvania. And at those hearings, Pennsylvania residents who personally struggled with poverty gave testimonies and called on our legislators to put people before profit. We delivered our campaign demands to the Pennsylvania State Legislature, and we had speakers for that and car caravans. The Poor People's Moral Action Congress in June 2019, there was a delegation from Pennsylvania at that. It was a total of 1,000 poor and impacted leaders and clergy and activists that convened for learning and hearing. We got to hear from presidential candidates. We had a presidential forum. We did community building, and there was a group that went, and this is what Nancy was talking about a little earlier, that testified at the Congressional Budget Committee hearing in Washington, D.C. And PA had one of the largest delegations there, and it was just, I was lucky enough to be there, so was Reverend Beth, and we just had it was an amazing experience. And then there was the virtual mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington that we participated in, and that was supposed to be live, but COVID changed those plans and it was virtual. We also supported voter protection and poll monitoring efforts last fall, and participated in National Moral Monday events through the first 100 days of the new administration, and that just ended recently. So there are some upcoming events that we're planning that I wanted to let everybody know about, and these are great ways for you to plug in to the campaign, to get to know people, to build some community. And so the next event that we have coming up is an interactive session on the state budget. Members of the coordinating committee, along with partners, have been studying various aspects of the state budget that relate to housing, welfare benefits, healthcare, the environment, mass incarceration, taxes, and more. So we're going to be sharing at this what we've collectively learned about where the wealth created by the 5.1 million poor and dispossessed people in Pennsylvania is going, and where it should be going instead based on the agenda we're fighting for. So that's this coming Tuesday, May 11th. And I believe Reverend Beth put the registration, Eric did, and thank you, in the chat. And so you need to register to get the Zoom information. And then there are more upcoming events. There is going to be a national launch of a congressional resolution, and that's going to be online. There'll be more information about that coming soon. And we're going to send this information out in an email after this as well, so you'll have it all. The week of May 24th, we're going to be doing some actions around the state budget. And Monday, June 7th, that we're going to be in Harrisburg. We're going to have a press conference, and we're going to be taking action together with states across the country. And Saturday, June 21st is the national gathering. That's the Mass Poor People's and Low Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C. And that's online. Is that correct, Eric or Reverend Beth? That's all online? Yeah, okay. And then we are also going to be starting statewide study sessions soon, studying different parts of the budget. And Eric, do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's kind of like a follow-up from today in a way. We're just going to go a little deeper into some of the key documents of the campaign, especially, there's a Jubilee platform, which really goes through a lot of demands that we have coming out, out of the assembly last year, but also this congressional resolution is coming out. So that it's sort of built around that, but it's also self-organized. So if people want to participate in the planning process and decide what we want to read, I'll put my contact in the chat if you want to get involved. We meet every week, I think on Wednesdays, but we may shift that around. But anyway, so I'll put my contact if people want to get involved in that. And it'll be like a regular thing, try to do it every month.
And can I add here, while we're talking about upcoming events, for us to have in mind for a year from now, the plan is for a mass Poor People's March on Washington in person. So again, that third weekend in June, we're headed in that direction. We're going back to DC.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us to a Q&A. We have some little bit of time for that, and then I'm going to close this out with a little video after that. But so the floor is open for any questions you guys might have.
So this is Chris. I'm from Carlisle. This gives us a lot of good information. I have been following the National Poor People's Campaign, participated in a few of the Moral Mondays, and I'm really interested in trying to find out how a person like myself can get involved in some of the activities that are happening that are more organizing than participation.
Mm-hmm. You want to go, Eric?
Sure. Well, this is a great time to get involved, I should say, because as you can probably see from those upcoming events that Beth put up, we're really doing a big mobilizing push now. There's a series of events starting really on Tuesday on the state budget webinar, but there'll be a call-in campaign to your reps in Harrisburg, also to national reps to get them to sign on to the national congressional resolution. And we're planning on being in Harrisburg as Beth mentioned, on June 7th. So there's a lot of work to be done ahead of that in terms of press, in terms of outreach, theomusicology, which, art and art. So all the working groups are really getting together now and making plans. I don't know if there's something in particular, also social media. If there's and of course the faith and clergy working group, reaching out to faith-based groups and churches and across the state. So yeah, is there anything in particular you're interested in? I could put the contact for who to contact for each working group in the chat, if that would be helpful, or if you have a particular interest, I'd let you know. And also the study groups, as I mentioned, coming up.
And Chris, thanks. Thanks for that interest and question. And as Beth said, we'll send an email as a follow-up that has ways to contact us. And Beth and I just put our info in the chat, so we could follow up with more specific things.
It's a lot to write down. Are you going to have any kind of paperwork sent email that has email addresses and things?
Yep.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Glad to hear you joined National Moral Mondays. I did that the 14 Mondays in a row. I know a lot of us did. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Randall in Harrisburg. I saw that one of the principles of the 14 or 15 was a commitment to nonviolence. Why is that important when the police are so eager to use violence? Why do we focus so much on a commitment to nonviolence?
I can take that. Well, I'd say we are really channeling Dr. King's teaching of we demonstrate our commitment by our capacity to endure and to suffer, and to frankly to not return evil for evil. And he was rooted. He was deeply influenced by Gandhi's principles that hitting back with the same kinds of techniques and force, it's not as effective, and it using violence dehumanizes us too, and it dehumanizes the other person. And so in nonviolence, we try to never lose sight of the humanity of every person in the situation. That is ourselves and the people who we want to make change. And nonviolence as a way that, you know, our Rabbi Michael Pollack talks about, it's a way to force the encounter. We hold on to our own humanity in the face of people who want to say, I don't care about you, I don't care about your issue, I can make you go away, I can invisibilize you. And we refuse to be invisibilized or refuse to act as if we don't have voices, to act for what we care about. Is that answering your question, Randall?
Yes, indeed.
Great.
I want to make a quick comment. I know somebody had said that it's a lot to write down, and I just want to say if you're on the actual Zoom meeting, you can open up the chats, and then if you hit file, it will let you download all of that, and then it will be in a digital file in your computer. In the Zoom folder.
Thank you. I had a couple thoughts on the nonviolence. I don't know if that's out of place for me to speak or not, but
happy to listen. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, violence is the sign that there is absolutely nothing left for someone who sees they have actually no room left with nonviolence to work. And it is the last straw, and it breaks. Once you commit to violence, nonviolence is no longer an option that you can fall back to. It's now up to someone else to allow you to commit to focus on nonviolence. And it also, a violent revolution begets another violent revolution. And while I don't want to begrudge I don't want to say that it's never, that someone who is pushed to the point of violence is wrong, it makes it much easier for there to be a follow-up violent event that displaces them as well, because someone put into power by violence is much easier to remove by violence.
Thank you so much, Brian. Those, yes, fabulous additions. Yep. Beth, would it be about time for our last item?
Yep, let's go ahead. So, and thank you everybody for those great questions. So before I close this out with a video, I do just want to mention a couple of events coming up through with March on Harrisburg that we're organizing. We're mobilizing right now to turn up the pressure on our legislators to pass the gift ban. We are one of only 8 states that doesn't limit the amount of gifts public officials can accept. So basically, as long as your legislator files a report, which is usually under file, it's underused, it's an opaque process, they can accept vacations, concert tickets, endless meals, drinks, anything, courtesy of lobbyists with an agenda. So we've actually been fighting March on Harrisburg for 4 years for a gift ban that would make this bribery illegal. And we are close to pushing it over the finish line. So we are really mobilizing right now to make that happen. And one of the first things we're doing is Friday, March 14th, we're having statewide community billboarding, which is basically we make these big signs and we go stand at intersections that are, have a lot of traffic, and it directs people to our website, and it builds recognition and excitement around the gift ban. And then on Thursday, so we're going to be mobilizing out in Center County and also in Harrisburg. And Thursday we're having a Zoom call, and this is going to be a planning meeting to talk about the nonviolent direct actions that we're going to be planning in those areas. And then we also lobby, and we have lobby days scheduled both in person in Harrisburg and virtually. And you are more than welcome. We would love for you to join us. And if you're a first time lobbyist, if you've never lobbied before, that is totally fine. We will give you a quick training, and we'll pair you with people who have done it before so you can feel comfortable doing that. And if you go to our events page, you'll see the lobby days scheduled there, and you can register through that. So I'm going to close this out here with this
Yeah,
video.
Beth,
Yeah.
is that May instead of March?
Oh. Yeah, sorry, that was an error. I didn't even see that. It's a typo. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
It's next Friday. Yeah, I appreciate that. And so I'm going to close this out with this video, and this is actually uses footage from the Moral Congress that we were talking about earlier, that Reverend Beth and I and Nancy Weston and some other people on the call I know were able to attend.
Eric was there, and for all of us, we experienced a transformative and galvanizing and energizing time, especially as you see at the end. Thank everybody for coming, really.
Yes, thank you so much.
Everybody
has a right
to live health care. Everybody don't stop.
The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has come up with a series of demands. And I want you to say those demands after I say them.
I know that you are here for the same reasons we all are here, to put our elected officials on notice. We demand an immediate restoration of the Voting Rights Act. We demand an end to racist gerrymandering. We demand a reversal of state laws that prevent municipalities from raising minimum wage. We demand a just immigration system. We demand a timely citizenship process that guarantees everyone the right to vote.
We demand an end to military aggression and warmongering. We demand a stop to privatization of military budget and any increase in military spending. We demand a ban on assault rifles and a ban on the easy access of firearms. We demand an end to federal programs that send military equipment into local and state communities. We demand that the call to build a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border be ceased.
We demand a ban on fracking, mountaintop removal, coal mining, coal ash ponds, and offshore drilling. We demand a ban on all new pipelines, refineries, and coal, oil, and gas export terminals.
We demand an immediate implementation of federal and state living wage laws. We demand the right for all workers to form and join unions. We demand equal pay for equal work. We demand a guaranteed annual income. We demand fully funded anti-poverty programs that protects the welfare of us all. We demand decent housing. We demand free tuition. We demand free tuition. We demand equity in education. We demand an end to the resegregation of schools. We demand equitable funding for historically Black colleges and universities. We demand relief from crushing household, student, and consumer debt. We demand the repeal of the 2017 federal tax law. And we demand that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share. We believe that we can win.
We believe that we can win. We believe that we can win. We believe that everybody has a right to live.
I want you to know that when hands that once picked cotton join hands of Latinos, join hands of progressive whites, join faith hands and labor hands and Asian hands and Native American hands and poor hands and wealthy hands with a conscience and gay hands and straight hands and trans hands and Christian hands and Jewish hands and Muslim hands and Hindu hands and Buddhist hands. When we all get together, we are an instrument of redemption. When we join hands, we can revive and make sure that the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and equal protection under the law is never taken away from anybody. So I got a question. Are the rejected ready to revive and declare that this land is your land, this land is my land, this land is our land, and together from the State House to the White House, the rejected are going to demand that this nation never give up on being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.